I'm here with Mina today. Mina is a gender security worker and sex education researcher. She works in queer peer support and movement building. As a queer and gender-based violence activist, she has experience in crisis intervention. During the pandemic, she worked with a frontline support organization for domestic violence survivors. Mina is particularly passionate about building resources for queer interpersonal violence, an area of gender-based violence that she finds to be overlooked, under-resourced, and very challenging to address. Hello, Mina. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Paz. Great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Please. So this is one of the reasons that I wanted you to be here and have this conversation, because the first question that I have for you is, how was your relationship with police working in the front lines of an organization supporting domestic violence survivors? Now, I know from experience as well, because I've also worked in the grassroots level and also in the global area, supporting gender-based violence survivors. And I know that this conversation around police interventions and police in general, yes or no, it's more complex than we think. And yeah, I think it's a good way to open the dialogue about that. So what are your thoughts on that? On how was your relationship with police in that experience?
So, relationship with police, that's it's very mixed. And it depends on where I've been, what position, like which of my social positions, social identities were at the core. Each of the times I've interacted with them. So specifically, I get started on the part where you talked about the organization. So with that, it was because the organization had put years of work into building a relationship with the police, with the local governance system. Because of all of that, because of the work that they had put in, I would say at that point this was good. A domestic violence organization had put a lot of effort into building relations with the local police, with the governance system, which meant that when there were cases on domestic violence that had to be filed, the organization had the credibility to get the police to take the cases seriously. So that, in my experience and what I observed, was fairly good. It took a lot of effort and a lot of years of work with the police to get them to that, to reach that point. But that, I would say, was good. However, individually, it's been very different without the backing of an organization, also an organization that had the credibility. And that is a very big deal here, the concept of respectable, who's credible, like who gets taken seriously. And I've been, again, on different ends of this. So I have to caste wise, I am a Savarna woman, which means I was born into one of the upper castes. So, but when I was a grassroots activist many, many years ago, I was a student activist and being part of these protests, I would see this difference because we would all be out protesting on the roads, crossing borders, and those of us that looked like we were from a city, we were young city students, we were treated very differently from like the actual people being affected. Like we were all like part of the movement. It was a pressure building movement, and we were there to build pressure. But the actual people getting affected were treated much worse than we were. And we were the people who were outside. We were from out of state. We were there just to build pressure. And so this was constantly, I think, how everybody is perceived, how everyone's perceived, and certain kinds of bodies from cities who look like they might be from a little bit more money, who perceived versus others. However, with queerness, it's an entirely different thing. So wherever I've been seen so as a student researcher as well, I had a very different experience. I had been to like police stations and I would talk, and they would treat me as someone who doesn't belong at a police station. So they would be like, so you wouldn't want to get involved with this, right? You wouldn't want these people in your neighborhoods, right? And that's not where I was coming from at all. But that was, which also meant I got treated with respect. I was given sort of a protected status, little infantilized, because again, I was still a woman and they would still be like, there was kind of a parent talking down to a child kind of attitude that I would be treated with. as a young woman who's trying to understand how safety is in the area and what the police does. So there was all of that, but with queerness is entirely different, where you enter and you are queer, which already puts you in a position of there is a lot of disgust. You're immediately treated as someone who is either, to be ridiculed or to be like just. And also there is a very, very, and sex and stigma is very big here. And there is a very strong sexualization as well, which does not help you at all with this. There is a lot in that. And so I would say, depending on what credibility you have, how respectably you are seen, which has a lot to do with social position on the it could be easier for you. And I'm talking about cases where you are going to seek justice. And even with that, even if you're going to seek justice, who you are and how you're perceived plays a very important role. And without the support of an organization, even if you're going to seek justice, it could be turned on you. And so, best case, you run around a lot and you get tired. Worst case, it turns on you.
Yeah, absolutely. I get that. I've been there as well. The whole system can be sometimes helpful, sometimes re-victimizing. So in that sense, do you think there's when we think about a potential future with no police, a potential, this discussion around abolition, this discussion around how to deal with things without the police, let's say, or the police involved in a different way, do you think that the police can be trained or yes, to have certain interventions that are more trauma informed, and have an anti-racist approach, an anti-ableist, and anti-misogynistic, homophobic approach? Do you think this is something that can be done to train the police to have different approaches?
Absolutely. Like, I think that has to be done. And I also think it can be, it should be. Because, countries go through different waves and tides, and social movements also go through different changes. And when there is a favorable change, when there is a bit of a push towards progress, it is important that we make use of the opportunity to also build awareness and sensitize those who have the power to, and I mean literal power, to intervene. Police officers, the police system, like the justice system, all the actors in the system have the power to intervene, which is not something everyday people have. It's not even something activists really have. So, as much as the relationship might be very fraught, I think we should and we can. And there are instances of organizations having success, movements having success, training them in trauma-based approaches. I had from both sides. When I was there have been activists that I know, we are activists, very, very established, we're activists, and governments and police officers, they have reached out to the activists themselves and they had invited them to come and do a sensitization and talk about. This was when there was already a bit of legislation that was supporting in that particular state, some legislation supporting queer identities. On the other hand, in my home state, there have been instances of queer activists that I worked with who, when they went to defend a fellow queer person who was, being wrongfully detained, they also got put behind bars. So it rests a lot on where the state is and what the attitude is. But when it's happening and it's good, it's very important because when someone's traumatized, that is when a lot of people reach out to the system. People approach the system with a lot of trauma, and it's very important. Even if the system's not equipped to, the police officers are not equipped to, no one's expecting them to be counselors, but just be aware of how it would be to be trauma informed in your approach, because re-victimization affects everything. It affects the testimonies you get. It affects the if you understand why narratives don't line up or why they do, what it means. Having a bit of a background in that is very helpful to be better at investigation and interrogation, and so there is all of that, and it's in India specifically. There is an act to protect children from child abuse. It's a very recent act. That is one of the most trauma-aware acts, and it's a very recent act. So that act takes a lot of effort to not re-victimize the child to the best of its ability. It has provisions in place and to expedite the process and get it done very quickly. So we have seen that you can legally build it in. You can build in a trauma-informed approach. And when you can't build it in, you can still sensitize those who are, at the front line of doing this work. Because you could have a very, very trauma-informed, wonderful act, and the people the acts and laws and regulations here. So you could have all of that, but the people who actually do frontline work, who deal with these crises, they could still be very effective.
Yeah, I agree that sometimes it is important for the governments, for the state to intervene in that sense. We're always, this discussion inside feminism as to whether have the state more involved or less involved, because we know that the state and the government and the law enforcement specifically is very patriarchal, and in that sense there's a whole group of people inside movement, I would say, inside feminism, that would say that we should be outside of that. That's like a more anarchist approach. But there's also another position which says like we need legislation, we need the possibility to intervene in these cases. So I think that that's a very accurate discussion to have. In that sense, I want to ask you about like who's inside and who's out. So who do you think? And I'm asking about India. I'm asking about globally, but also locally. So you can answer from whichever perspective you want. But who are the police looking after? Like, who are they protecting? And it's a who, it's a what. Do you think, what do you think around that? Like, who are they protecting,
We've touched upon this already. I would definitely say with India, caste is the first level at which this is very, very strong. And this is not from lived experience, this is from what I've learned and understood. So there's a history in India, this is a colonial history of criminalization of castes and tribes. There have been specific castes, specific tribes that have been notified as criminal tribes. So you are in registries as, people belonging to this tribe, and you're a criminal. So you don't have to do anything, just belonging to that. And this has been denotified. There has been work to undo all of the classification that was done, all the however, this continues. This is still there, and just based on your caste, you get profiled a lot at police station. And a very early, again, this is a very early instance when I was in college. So we were at a different point. I feel like we're constantly crossing borders, but we were crossing another state border, and so there was an instance of sexual harassment that happened. Like one of my friends, and that happened, and it was at night. It was a bad experience, and we had reached out to the police, and everyone involved was right there. So this was a woman, I was a woman, and there was one guy with us, and we were very young. So when the police came, they first of all initially dealt exclusively with the guy. She was the one who was affected, but they spoke to him. They got his caste identity. He was very, very upper caste. So based on that, they were like, okay, this is something that they continued talking to him. And there were two people implicated in the actual incident. And so they got one of the guys, and they asked what his caste was. And from my understanding of that region, because caste, again, it changes from region to region where a particular caste or a subcaste is ranked. It's not universal, it's not national. So that is a caste that there is considered one of the most criminal, like it's called classified as a criminal caste. So the person identified as someone being from that caste, and immediately the police were ready to go. The other one had run away, and they had an inkling of what his caste. So they were ready to take this man. And there was so much happening with this, and these are very common instances. First, there is patriarchy and there's misogyny, and it's just not talking to a woman. and then taking the word of the upper caste man. And after that, see, now the thing is, I can't be sure, but if the situation had been reversed, if the man that they interrogated had been from an upper caste or at least a dominant caste in that area, they may not have risked arresting him, because police exist within the community, they exist within the region, and they also face community pressures, caste pressures. They also are likely to be from the dominant communities. So one way or the other, either due to internal prejudice or due to pressure from the dominant community, they're likely to not arrest someone for that. And we have all the time we have keys. So when there is pressure on a particular case, something has been stolen, someone's been hurt, and if there is a lot of public pressure building in the public, they immediately arrest someone. And this is someone who's likely to already be on their record, and this is someone who's likely to be from a group that is easily perceived as criminal. Yeah, so that is a very who gets protected. This is what I was talking about, right? Like I enter a police station and ask a question, and they would be like, would you want these people in your area? And without realizing that my like what I was there to do was to work towards safety for the very good. So I get back then I used to immediately get seen as someone who's part of the system. I have also entered police stations where as a person who's outside the system, as a queer person asking for something, or as a person trying to file a domestic violence case. When I'm outside the system, when you do anything that affects the family structure or the community structure, you are outside the system. Like if I go to file a divorce case, I go to file a domestic violence case, I am stirring up the pot. I am trying to break the family apart. They don't take my case seriously, or they try to dismiss my case. Best case, they ask me to run around, go to this station, go to that station, and it's not where you should go to the court. Worst case, yeah, there have been instances of like people going to the police station, and they bring your husband or they bring your partner or whoever is the person who, yeah, so they force you to have a confrontation and try to push you back into the structure of the family or the structure of the community. And a lot of the attempts at reconciliation that happen at the station, they're designed to keep you within the social system that it.
It's funny how, well, it's not funny at all, is it? How in different cultures we have different, specific things that are from different countries and different cultures, but at the end, this sort of scheme, there's not a scheme, like this dynamic in which we protect the rich, we protect the hetero norm, the male, the cis structure. It's like more or less the same in different parts of the world. So in that sense, do you think, and this is when we start to, talk about imagining new worlds to live, do you think there's a future with no police? What do you think about that? And what do you think about that in terms of, from your experience working with gender-based violence? Do you think there can be a future with no police? Do you think there can be a point, a moment in which you don't need police intervention and you can turn to an alternative way to deal with things? What do you think about the future in that sense?
That's okay. Many parts to my answer on that. One is that right away, I wouldn't say a word without the police is necessarily a solution, but that is definitely something we can try. Like, I mean, we have this, and that's a valid alternative. If we have a future without the police, then we need some other system to replace that. Because I think that position where someone intervenes, like someone with the power to intervene, that's very important. And I think all of us agree that the justice system is necessary, needs to be reformed. So the justice system definitely is necessary, and a part of it that has the capacity to intervene is necessary. However, the police, the way we have it, we can have futures without it, and also in some ways we do. So I want to talk about two different things here. One is domestic violence, and then it's queer interpersonal violence. So in a sense, we have no police for queer interpersonal violence. So that is the kind of, that's what I'm going to talk about, which is where all my mixed feelings come from. Because again, domestic violence in India, that is a legal provision. It like basically it was criminalized only in 2005. It's a very recent piece of legislation. So until then, we didn't have a piece of legislation saying domestic violence is criminal. You could get, you could file a case against this using general categories of violence, but domestic violence specifically. But this is very important because sure there were acts against violence and everything, but no one would take a case of, again, it's the question of who is inside, who's outside, who gets to be criminal. Like the husband does not get to be a criminal, right? So which is why we needed the domestic violence legislation. It's taken years, but finally this is an act where the police have been effective in some cases. Like unique crisis intervention, there are ways in which using this act, you can reach out to the police, and there are specific interventions in the act where you can use them. Similarly, child sexual abuse, an act that came into place only 2012, is extremely recent. So yes, all of these things existed before that, and people have their own ways of dealing with it, but they're not effective ways. Like first of all, this is not even, it's still not, the idea that violence is not okay. It's not normalized. Domestic violence is not okay. I grew up around a lot of domestic violence. It's a practice that continues extensively around me. And I followed the act since I was very, very young. So I was aware when in 2005, that I was very young, but I was aware that this act was passed. And now you could go to the police and say this is wrong. Until then, you couldn't make a case for the fact that this was wrong. And what it also did was it helped me use it in my family, use it around and say, even if actually, if I went to the police, maybe they wouldn't have taken my case seriously, but I could have, I did go around saying, I'll get you booked. This is legally wrong. So we had that. So as amazing as in limited capacity, it has been with domestic violence. This has been for women, like women who are in, who are married women, in some cases in live-in relationships. But this is still very much within the family and the marriage structure. Right? So that is where you get to access the Domestic Violence Act. And children, again, as a protected category, this has also been possible. But with something like queer interpersonal violence, I think they're like, I have no idea how the system could ever get equipped to handle something like this because it is violence, it is wrong. But if you go and try to file a complaint, your queerness, first of all, that again, being queer was criminal until very recent. And being queer was criminal. So first, just for that, that was a. Then after that, now that being it has been decriminalized, and there is an argument on gender marriage equality going on in the court right now. But that's marriage equality is not going to give you all the rights, right? Like I mean, there is a lot of human rights and legal rights get denied when you enter a station because your queerness, the system has no idea what to do with it. So there is profiling and you're kept out. And there is still, even though it's been decriminalized, you are still first seen as a criminal. Even if you go trying to file a complaint, they think there is something fundamentally wrong with you. And either dismiss it or try to put you behind bars. There have been cases of queer people in abusive relationships trying to make use of the Domestic Violence Act. You go and you get like your partner, this person, is the one who is being abused, and there is proof of that. However, you get put behind bars. There have been instances of that. Then, if you're a same-sex couple, something of that sort, and then you go to the police, there is no frame of reference for what that is. That just looks like something that is wrong, and there is a lot of harassment that you come under. So there are regulations that are coming in place asking the police to not harass queer people. Like imagine that, right? Just when asking the police to not harass queer people or people who are defending queer people at station. So you are talking about having to not harass people who are not criminals, who are people who come to file a complaint. So first is that, and then you have to figure out a way to understand who's wrong and what is wrong and how you apply existing laws. It's not that complicated, honestly. You know who's done something and who's wrong, and you just the matter of delivering justice. But it's very, very far from that. So you know that you're a queer person. It's not just interpersonal violence for that matter. Actually, it's just interpersonal violence is hard because any kind of intimate relationship, taking it to police is hard. But if you're a queer person and you have faced any kind of harm, or getting justice, or even an intervention, not necessarily justice, you need protection, you need someone to a restraining order. It is extremely hard, which is why I say where people don't have a police, and we already work with alternate systems of justice, and which is also something like even as we build a different kind of police or an entirely different justice system, I think we need to look into all the ways in which we have approached justice before we had these acts. What did we do before 2005, before the Domestic Violence Act happened? How were people dealing with domestic violence? What were ways in which, how did we do it? To me, accountability is important, intervention is important. How did we work towards accountability and intervention in the absence of the police? We don't have great answers, but I think at least for people who are clearly outside the system, we have communities. And in these communities, we can work towards resources, identifying what is right and wrong. Like we need to define for ourselves what is right and what is wrong, not give anyone too much power. We need to hold everyone accountable. And in specific cases of someone having faced something, someone being hurt, we come up with mechanisms to deal with it. So I generally don't advocate for overall community interventions taking over the police, because for larger public, the general public, I don't think it's a good idea, because I think the general public, the general community in India at least, it's still very caste, very patriarchal. And I do not think it's a good idea to let the public take community-based action. But for anyone outside the system and in facing a crime or facing a kind of violence that is not identified, I think community interventions are the way to go. But for that, we as a community come together, understand how we are doing accountability and intervention. Because it's very easy to go wrong with intervention. It's very easy to become the police. It's very easy to judge, morally decide what is right and wrong. It's very easy to ostracize. So, and so we need to figure out how we do that. But there is scope for that.
That's so interesting. I think we can keep thinking about that and talking about that for ages, because this is a very interesting topic. Like I was going to ask you about, because there's this alternative. I don't want to bring the topic here, but because it will make it so long. But to think about community-based problem management, restorative justice, that's a whole new topic to discuss. But it is true that how we deal with community-based interventions to avoid, or as an alternative to the police, when the community itself can be very, traditional, patriarchal, and sexist. I think that's a topic for another video, and this is very interesting. So, as a last question, I want to ask you about you already mentioned a couple of things, but what can we do? Like, what do we do now? Like, how can we? Is there any alternative as a community care practice that you use, that you found useful to protect your community? And when I say your community, you can think about India, but you also can think about the queer community in India. What are some little things that you do to ensure safety from the police, from the community? Yeah, if you can briefly talk to me about that, it could be great.
Yeah. So yes, one thing that is definitely been helpful, what I mentioned just now, that we don't just let the community become the fullest. If we are working on community-based interventions, we come together, we sit, we figure out a framework, we figure out accountability, we figure out intervention. So just that fact that this is an intentional process changes a lot, because otherwise we are going based on biases and prejudices, and even within the queer community, there are a lot of biases and there is a lot of prejudice. You sit and figure out a way in which you can do it. Plus, assuming that we are not immediately going to get these rights, these legal rights, the community can do a lot in terms of being that space which actually validates your experience and cares for that experience, even if you don't get justice in the legal sense. So you can hold space for the harm that someone's experienced. You can validate it. You can say that, yes, this is wrong and it's unfair that you cannot get justice. Community can find other ways of safeguarding is something that I think is a community practice that has existed for a very, very long time. We extend that to individuals. We extend that to the community as a whole. And in my personal experience, protecting the community and individuals in it, I think we all choose how much to be visible in certain spaces, how much to be visible within the system, whether we want to show up on the system or not. People who are on the radar of the system, who are doing things with the system, often choose to keep their queer identities invisible, because it helps them get access to these spaces and to do the work that they're doing, that we are doing. And the other way is allyship, where you know that, for example, I'm cis, I'm queer, but there are things that I can do that a trans queer person might not be able to do. And if there is legislation that's come for gender equality, marriage equality, right? The case that's being discussed in India right now, you make sure that it doesn't just that it's something that could benefit the cis queers a lot, but we make sure that we use the momentum to support the trans movement as well, to transfer it, to share solidarity. So those are the ways in which, when we get rights, when there is attention, when there is protection, we make sure that.
Thank you so much. It's been really interesting. Thank you so much for being here, and also for all the work you're doing. I really want to talk about gender-based violence in queer relationships in another video as well, because I also think that that's a very challenging situation to deal with. And we can agree that there's legislation that needs to be done around that too. So thank you very much for this. You're amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paz. This is great. It's great to have a conversation around these things, because restorative justice isn't going to happen without enough imagination around it. It's great to get started in that direction. As someone who is very focused on crisis intervention, it's hard for me to think beyond the fullest, but it's great to actually start having these. Thank you very, very much.
It's great to start thinking about it. Then we'll see. Thank you.
You're amazing as well. Bye.